Well, hello, this is Jeff Dalrymple, Executive Director at the Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. We are a national association of Christian ministries committed to child and youth protection. We do that through established child safety standards and accreditation. The end result is a peace of mind for parents, confidence for leaders, and even deterrence for predators. Today, on this episode of Meet the Expert, it is my joy to introduce Dr. Chuck Coker. Dr. Coker is in Jacksonville, Florida, and he serves with an organization called Life Thrive. Chuck, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. I'm excited about being here and being able to share with your ECAP audience. My background was in executive level management with New York Stock Exchange Company before the company was sold, and then I moved into a role as department head at Westminster in the United Kingdom, teaching doctoral master's level students in theology-based information. And during that time, we were able to uncover with my wonderful graduate assistants every year a lot of information about the things that we're going to be discussing today, how to identify character, how to build character, and what are some of the tools that we'll be able to use to help you guarantee that you have the right person in the right position.
Chuck, our Christian ministries that are watching this recording uh, are having employees, volunteers. These workers that we define are serving some of our greatest and prized possessions, right? Our children.
Indeed. Indeed, they
Next
are.
generation. And so we take very seriously that we want to make sure that those people who are interacting with them, supervising them, teaching them, training them, serving them, whatever that activity might be, we want to make sure that we have the right people there who have the right character. Now, we as Bible-believing, gospel-loving Christians understand that we live in a Genesis 3 world. We understand that sin it exists. And so to discern someone's intentions is very difficult. We ultimately know that only God knows the heart. And so what we're hoping to accomplish here today is how can we equip our leaders to hire the right workers, again, employees or volunteers, whatever capacity, to serve in our Christian ministries. And I could not think of anyone better than Dr. Chuck Coker to come in and help give us some tools, resources, tips on how to discern character and to frankly weed out those who would have some sort of malicious intent. And so, Chuck, would you just maybe take it from there as a little bit of a setup into our topic today on
Sure.
discerning character in those hiring onboarding practices?
Well, what I'd like to say as we begin this process, Jeff, is that when we look at the statistics that I've gathered over the past few years, and I've been doing this for almost 40 years, we identified that there is a 70% turnover in faith-based institutions during a 5-year period. And a lot of that has to do with the culture that we're bringing people into. The leader of the nonprofit is normally a visionary, but the people underneath him may not be as deeply involved in that same vision. So therefore, what a new employee or someone coming into the organization uh, identifies is there's a difference between what the website says and what the culture internally says. So they get mixed messages. So I'm going to briefly touch on the fact that employee engagement is critical because what it does is it helps align the culture along with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And it increases when there's employee engagement, a 32% higher retention rate. That's critical because we lose so much information. It also improves job performance and dynamics with a 20% increase in productivity if leadership is actually engaged with their people, and it reduces turnover costs 50 to 60%. That's significant. But more than anything, what the organization needs to do is to brand themselves to attract the right kind of talent. Because yes, there's a lot of people out there looking for jobs, but a lot of them don't go to the nonprofit sector simply because of the fact it doesn't pay as well. And you may not have all the benefits. But what we have found that when we share the mission, vision, and values with these new employees, it actually, according to Deloitte, increases the success rate of the people that we do hire 29%. That's significant. And it also helps the people who are employed there have a sense of belonging. And when an individual has a sense of belonging, their natural characteristic traits of attachment to the organization and to management and leadership increases between 55 and 75%. So when we think about those things, when we start the involvement with the hiring and development process, we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing on our end to attract people of character, because people of character will leave as soon as they recognize there's not a congruence and an alignment with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it basically helps determine alignment to the mission as almost the first stop in a vetting process. And so you're actually helping us go to a deeper level, right? It's like it's not just about screening out bad characters or bad actors. You're actually helping me find the best person to align with our mission, and you're buying into who we are and what we're all about. Well, we're
That's
excited to bring
exactly
together.
right, Jeff. Exactly right, because people of character will not stay in an organization that does not have that congruence, alliance, and engagement with their people. Now, let's talk about identifying character first off. There is something in our world called benchmarking. Benchmarking helps us understand not just what a person does, but how a person does it. And sometimes that is more critical than their technical experience. You see, what most organizations are testing for today is not the technical expertise, but the ability to communicate and get along with the people in the organization. It has much more to do with the work and the character. For example, conscientiousness aligns with reliability and discipline, while agreeableness relates to kindness and teamwork. And those are the things that we're looking for in a nonprofit. So, as we look at some of the meta-analysis of the faith-based community, it reveals that humility, initiative, and conscientiousness are the best predictors of job performance. Now, here's the good thing is that those things can be assessed ahead of time. We can actually know before the person sits down in their desk whether these uh, capacities are actually there within the individual. And when we know that assessments can reduce turnover rate 12 to 15% when we're focused on the culture and character alignment. So as we do that, one of the best things that we can do is ask the right kind of questions. You see, so many faith-based organizations want to promote their process, promote their objectives, promote their mission, when in fact, the interviewing process is not just a screening process, but it's a process where we want to eliminate people that don't fit our culture and do not have the character and the initiative to do the job. And I know that sounds harsh, but the reality is that one of the biggest challenges that we have in this process is making sure that individuals have that ability behind them. And when we set a benchmark or we develop the kind of understanding of what kind of personality traits are there, then we can screen for them and move them ahead um, of the curve. So on our next slide, Jeff, what I want to do is share the fact that these things are, yes, they're there and they're available. But what I want to do now is I want to give you 5 questions that you can ask. And on our next slide, we will see those 5 questions that we can ask. The focus should be their past experience so that we can identify the character traits. And one thing that I will tell you is that a structured interview is twice as effective as unstructured interviews. The smaller the nonprofit or the faith-based institution, the more chances there are that the individual will not have that structured interview process. So if you'd like help, that's what we're here for at ECAP, is to help you identify the things that are going to help you succeed. Now, let me give you some examples. Can you describe a time when you had to admit a mistake at work? And how did you handle it? And what did you learn for the experience? This helps us identify if there's humility, accountability, and self-awareness in an individual. And humility, according to DePaul University, is the #1 factor with a 69.96% correlation to the fact of whether a person can grow and develop into this job. Another question you might want to consider asking is, tell me about a time when you faced a challenging ethical decision at work. What was the situation and how did you decide what to do? Now we're digging into an individual's motivations. And if we believe what Paul says in his epistles, we know that it is for us to plant and us to water. It is not about bringing about the results. That's God's work. So we have to search for and look for the motivations and identifying how a person de dealt with a challenging ethical situation brings that motivation out so that we can then discern it. A third good question that you might want to ask as you interview is, describe a situation where you had to work with someone whose personality or approach differed significantly from yours. How did you manage that relationship? Well, one of the things that we have learned also in these studies is the fact that accepting direction and information for someone that you may not necessarily like or gel with can be a huge factor in identifying a person's character. Because if they will not listen to something because of the way they look or the way that they talk and everything, you have a character flaw. So these are the kind of things that we want to focus on. Let's look at #4. Give an example of a time when you faced significant pressure or stress at work. How did you cope and what strategies helped you persevere? This question will help you identify the depth and the magnitude of the fruit of their spirit. And of course, we have free assessments at lifethrive.com for spiritual gifts and fruit of the Spirit that will help you discern these things, along with the behaviors and values that tell you how they're going to approach the job. But one of the key elements, and of course, the last aspect of the fruit of the Spirit, is self-control. And in a high-pressured faith-based situation, you're dealing with people and people issues, and self-control is going to be one of those key factors. And if that is not available to the person, or they're not illustrating it very well, you have a real problem, because self-control is going to be the key to maintaining your supporters, maintaining your volunteers, and maintaining an engaged atmosphere within the organization itself. Last question I would suggest that you might focus on is describe a project or task that required a lot of attention to detail. How did you ensure the accuracy and quality throughout the process? Now, not all of us are detailed people. Many times leaders are not detailed people, they're conceptual people. So it pays us all to slow down. My grandfather told me this when I was younger, and I didn't get it until much later. Sometimes, Chuck, you have to slow down to speed up. And that's so critical in so many things that we do within the ministry that you're involved with. So, paying attention to the detail, listening, engaging, asking questions are the key element to engaging your processes and developing the character within the people. If it's not already there, the engagement process will help enhance that. And what we can do is a before and after assessment to identify the growth and development in those particular areas. Jeff, do you have any questions about these particular areas?
No questions yet, but again, you're giving us far more value than maybe we first thought we were getting, and so this is fantastic. The alignment, the interview process, the questions, and what they discover. No questions yet. This is great. I'll keep managing the slides here for you.
Okay. On our next slide, I want to take us to the next level of that interviewing process. On step 2B, we see the interviewing process, and there's something called situational judgment test. These are hypothetical job-related scenarios that you can present to your candidate and ask them how they would handle it. Because what you're trying to identify with this particular uh, approach is the fact that you want to identify not just how they make decisions, but how they reason through this process ethically. Because you and I both know that a nonprofit organization without ethics isn't going to last long. And we have to focus on the things that are biblical principles that help us identify the key principles of service to the people that God has called us to serve. Just that simple. The studies that I've been involved with show that the situational judgment tests have an extremely strong predictive validity on job performance. 34% improvement in job performance if there is a strong correlation between the roles, which we can assess with behaviors, and the ethics, which we can assess with the value systems of the individual. Folks, these tests are free to you. There is no reason not to use them at our Life Thrive site. These assessments were created to help you identify and not have regrets about moving forward. Are they perfect? No. The Lord's the only one that's perfect. But what we can show is, as I've tried to relate with each of these areas, a huge increase. In this particular case, when we ask situational judgment test questions, we're 34% better at hiring the right person. And that's critical. So 1 out of 3 people that you interview are going to make a significant difference. And situational job judgment tests also correlate with pro-social, emotional intelligence-based behaviors, and they reduce the counterproductive work that a person has to do because the communication clarity is so much deeper at the beginning than it is moving later. When you have people that present fudge factors on their resumes, these can be screened out through the assessments. Now, Let me tell you a startling fact, and there's no difference between faith-based institutions and secular institutions. 58% of the people surveyed admit to either fudging, enhancing, or outright lying on their resumes. Now, that's a scary thought that people would do that, but these are the ones that admit it. Not the total amount of fudge factors that are there, but just the ones that admit it. So some people are desperate for jobs and they'll say they can do anything. But this is why character is so critical for us to measure. And the higher the level of this ethical decision making and reasoning that we can identify through situational judgment tests is going to help you hire a person with character. Now, as we move on to step 2C, what we have is a way for you to identify once a person starts their role. Now, here's the thing that I will tell you that is universal, almost universal, in 48 of the 50 states. Each of these 48 states are called at-will states. In other words, they have the right to terminate an employee within the first 90 days for no reason. Now, does that mean that we take advantage of people? No, of course not. But what it does do is it gives the organization the right to chart the individual. And if they're not living up to expectations, then you're doing them an injustice by keeping them there. Now, during this first month, you can monitor their interactions and how they respond to constructive feedback, teamwork, and challenges that they're going to face. This will give you a much better insight into their adaptability, resilience, and honesty. And those are all critical characters, uh, uh, critical aspects of character. The other thing that you want to do is have regular informal assessments, not just with the individual, but with their peers and with their supervisors during this onboarding process. Now, let me share something with you that's extremely important. During the first 90 to 180 days, an individual will make up their mind whether they're going to stay there or not. So during that first 90 days or the trial period of at-will states, you have to begin to pour into that individual and identify from observation and from their work ethic what kind of progress they're making. And it's not always from them. You need to talk to their peers and supervisors too, because long-term job performance is going to be measured by the character and the commitment that the individual has. And 39% higher retention rates when you do this. So as we started off this thing, this presentation, we talked about the fact that we have a responsibility, and that responsibility does not end just because we hire someone. The observation during this onboarding period, and let me share one other thing with you. Onboarding is not a 1-hour session to tell you about the history of a company. It is to help the person fit into the culture and identify with the culture and align their cultural aspects with the organizations so that we can provide them with the feedback to help them improve. Because early feedback has predictive validity for gauging long-term integrity and adaptability. People will stay if they're engaged. If they're not engaged, here's the statistics, and let me show you how scary they are. The average tenure of an employee in America today, especially in faith-based institution, is 2 years and 4 months. Now, When we move down to the millennials, it is 1 year and 9 months. When we move down to the Gen Z, it's 1 year and 7 months. They're looking for that engagement. They're looking for you to help build their resume. They're looking for the empowerment that is necessary that will provide the job satisfaction for the role that they've been assigned to. Because in nonprofits, the visionary is very rarely involved in the day-to-day business. It's the mid-level manager. So the people in the line working area will leave. That's why the attrition rate is so high after 5 years if they are not engaged. So let's go to that next step in step two. Realistic job previews allow us to put a new employee in situations that mimic real job situations. Some people call them simulations. And what we can identify in those first month or two, while you are still in at-will state, you can reveal whether a person has perseverance, adaptability, and they're honest. These are key character traits that have to be not only projected, but lived out with a nonprofit organization. Otherwise, it won't be collaborative. You won't solve the problems, and you won't be able to deal with customers the way they need to be dealt with. Studies show that realistic job previews or these simulations actually reduce turnover 22%. Now, if you add up what we've just talked about, and we're not through yet, you're looking at a 70+% opportunity to retain people of character by using these particular steps. So whether they're client-facing or team-dependent roles really doesn't matter. The key is the engagement with people of character who care about each other. And finally, what I would like for you to consider is going to lifethrive.com. On our next slide, I've given you several links that will be helpful. First of all, I want you to take advantage of something that's free. And just because it's free doesn't mean it's worthless. We have used these tools in 128 countries. And even though there are cultural variances, what they do is they allow us to develop those benchmarks and identify not just how a person's going to do a job, but why the person will do that. In other words, are they people of character? And we've learned some lessons from this. The more objective a person is, the more they're going to get in the zone and focus on their job. However, the more subjective a person is, the more they have a tendency to flit around and try to please people rather than simply accomplish the task that they have been asked to perform. So the free assessments will give you two things. They will give you how the person's going to approach the job and where is their character focus? Where is their values focused? Is it on the task? Is it on people? Is it on the environment? Is it on the circumstances? Is it on their desire to lead? Or is it based on the biblical principles or the principles that founded the organizations? Now, if you are hiring an executive or something like that, we have more in-depth paid assessments there. But we also have training courses available to you that we will make a special ECAP discount available to all ECAP members. This is important because these courses normally sell for thousands of dollars in many cases, but they're not going to be that expensive to you. As a faith-based nonprofit organization, it's critical that you invest in your people. I did a survey several years ago with 1,486 organizations of all sizes. And the number one factor that an employee wants is, are you going to build my resume and develop me and give me a good place to work? 74%, 3 out of 4 people said that's what's most important when I come to work with your nonprofit. Only you, as a leader in that organization, can do that, but you need to know that the person has the right training and development so that they can move into either a middle management or leadership role in the days ahead. I tell you all these things because after 34 years of working with nonprofit organizations, whether it be seminaries, parachurch organizations, megachurch organizations, and even denominations, one of the biggest challenges that we face and the dysfunction that exists in some nonprofits is the fact that they're not aligned and they're not dealing with people of character. And that's sad to say. But when we surveyed one denomination, we found 58% of their membership offices were dysfunctional. And while I hate to say that, the reality is what we do is we try to plug holes. And plugging holes, putting square pegs in round holes, does not work, especially since we are in the people business. I hope that this has been helpful to you today. And all of us at Life Thrive and ECAP are genuinely committed to helping you. You deserve the very best training, the very best development, and the very best insights because you represent God to each one of your employees. And it's critical that we give them the best, not just of ourselves, but of the mission, vision, and values that God has called you to.
Chuck, thank you. Very, very helpful as we consider determining character traits in candidates. Again, whether this is an employee or a volunteer. Typically in an organization like a Christian school or even a camp or other nonprofit ministry, there's usually a standard onboarding process, that starts with some sort of application and interview, like we were just talking about here, and then moves into screening and training, that might include reference checks and this sort of thing. But in churches in particular, we see people taking shortcuts and just throwing someone into a role without doing more vetting. And that's really what you've helped us consider here today is the vetting process that might feel a little bit formal in a church context, but is really, really important to make sure that someone's completely aligned with the mission, values, and convictions of the church or the organization, and then really sets them up for success for the role that you're bringing them onto. And so it's going to feel probably like a little bit of a formality. And that's where maybe as you're doing those interviews, maybe invite someone else to do them with you. Something that I've found helpful is maybe someone who doesn't quite have the same history with that individual to sit down. It's going to feel like a formal interview, and that's on purpose. You're really trying to say this role is significant enough for us to go through this screening process because of the stewardship that we have as an organization, as leaders in our ministry, but also to best make sure that this role is a good fit for you and what the Lord's called you to do. And so you've given us some of those stewardship principles, Chuck, to help people think through screening for character. I'll never forget working at a well-known seminary for almost 10 years, and we in the events office hired someone, and I'm not going to mention any names or give any sort of confidential information, but we hired someone who was a seminary student. And I say that because we were all surprised when it was discovered that this was a wanted felon out of Cobb County, the Atlanta area. And he had submitted himself using his father's identity. And then we didn't know that until missing MacBook computer disappeared. And And sure enough, when they double checked the background check and the application, found out that it was not the person who was actually working. That was his father, and he had hidden his identity. And so I don't know how some of these screening questions might have discovered that, but I just used that to illustrate that even in a seminary environment, this was a seminary student. You have people who are looking to take advantage of others and to cut corners and maybe even to create trouble, to commit crimes, to groom, to steal. And it's our responsibility as Christian leaders, yes, to trust the Lord, but to do our part to discern character and to bring in the right person for that role. Also, to weed out anyone who is just not a good fit or shouldn't have access to handling money or caring for the vulnerable, including our kids. Chuck, any stories from your history that you can share with us that we can learn from?
Well, I I think you've hit on a very important note, and that is the fact that Paul tells us in Galatians that even if a person appears as an angel of light, they may not be who they appear to be. And we have to focus on that. And here's the thing that we often see in faith-based institutions, and that is an individual who will come into an organization and who will work, but they're of the mindset that says, well, if it doesn't get done, the Lord will take care of it. And you and I both know Paul says to run the race to win. We are there to focus on achieving the best objective because we're dealing with people's lives. And a life is a valuable possession to the Lord. Why would the Lord love everyone equally if each one of us weren't important? And so as we think about character, what do we think about? Can they do the job and will they do the job? And it's our responsibility to dig into this and not just understand what's on the resume, but what's in the heart. And when we don't focus on what's in the heart, we miss the real person. It's like the scripture says. The Lord looks at people based on their heart, not their outward appearance. And we have to take that whole concept into consideration. Now, one of the things that we've tried to share with you is, first of all, we've given you some questions, but there are also characteristics in the behavior values and some of the other free assessments, spiritual gifts, fruit of the Spirit, that will help you. And if you need that help, contact ECAP. That's why we're here. We want to help you. We want to pour into your lives and give you the tools that are necessary to make sure that you are not just a good organization, but you are a great organization, blessed by the Lord above.
Chuck, you're talking about, I just will never forget the three C's, character, competency, and chemistry are important in hiring and keeping team members. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is the onboarding of an individual based on character. And you've touched on a little bit the competency, right? The skills and abilities that they have to do whatever it is that you want them to do. And then there's even a chemistry piece. You have some people that just don't click for whatever reason, right? We see that in the scriptures too, right? Barnabas got sideways and went somewhere else to do ministry. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, how we scatter to some degree. So we talked a lot about character and competency, but then that's an ongoing factor as well. It's not just a part of that the onboarding, it's ongoing as well. Can you speak to that? What happens when someone demonstrates a lack of character or a lack of competence? What do you do?
Well, I think the first thing is to give them a little sit-down meeting and identify, first of all, ask them a question. Why did you do it that way? Not insinuating that it was right, wrong, or indifferent, but tell me how you came to that decision. And then what do you think would have happened if you had handled it this way? And then, as a mentor, coach, or whatever you might be to that individual, supervisor or manager, you now have an opportunity for teaching. And if you've done some screening up front and they are teachable, which we can draw from our coachability assessment, then we have an understanding of not just where to approach them, but how to approach them with this process. Now, I'm going to share something else with you too, and that is the fact that a normal quantitative analytical annual survey on an individual's employability or a performance appraisal is just about worthless. Once a year, it has been proven that 72% of the people that are appraised once a year feel that it's biased or situational based on how the manager leader feels at that particular moment. That's why it is critical to have these ongoing sessions that we discussed in our presentation today, because without a regular engagement process, employees will oftentimes say this is negative. We know right now that 52% of all employees see performance appraisals negatively. So what we want to do is we want to add some dimensions to that, not just the monthly or biweekly or whatever interactive feedback sessions, but second of all, something called PDPs, personal development plans, or MBOs, management by objectives, allows a collaborative process between the leader and the employee, which brings that engagement closer together. And last but not least is the 360. Tell me how all of the people that work with you appraise you versus your own appraisal of yourself. What this does is it brings a 78% positive reflection on the employee as to where they're going. Now, you mentioned three C's. I have a fourth C that I want, and that is capacity, because all employees want more capacity unless they're just totally into their job, don't want to do anything else. And then how much character are they really displaying without initiative? So building their capacity, saying, what would you like to do next? What do you think would be a challenge to grow you and develop you, is going to intensify that engagement and build a stronger employee with stronger character.
So character, competence, chemistry, and capacity.
That's it.
Okay, that's
The
good.
company is concerned with competence and character. Can they do the job? Will they do the job? The employee is concerned with chemistry and capacity. Is this going to be a great place to work? And will you build my resume? But see, all of those things can come together when the management leadership is engaged with the staff.
I really like the idea of having those uh, the expectation, the precedent set that we do some sort of evaluation on a regular basis. It's harder to implement that after the fact, or after you start seeing performance issues and you try to you say, oh, we should do some sort of performance evaluation. I know you're saying that those are unpopular with employees. But it's harder to do those after the fact, after performance has been declining. It's better just to set that expectation up front. But then you also talk about teachability, and I think that's really important. And you even talk a little bit, Chuck, about the redemptive nature of going to someone and asking the question, giving them benefit of the doubt, and asking them, why did you do X, Y, Z? And it makes me think of a mentor that encouraged me to use the words, help me understand, because you go into those conversations sometimes thinking you've got it you understand what their motivations were, and you start to make assumptions about their motivation. and
Mhm.
going in, helping discern, why did they make that decision? Why did they say or do those things? And then making that a coaching opportunity to help them learn and grow and to be a better employee. Honestly, again, all of this comes from our biblical Christian worldview, which sees people not as tools to be used, but as resources to manage and steward, because one day we'll stand before the Lord and give an account for even the team members that He's entrusted us to, not only the mission. That's the thing, right? We joke in Christian ministries and say, wouldn't ministry be so much easier if we didn't have people, right? And yet our ministries are all about people growing in Christ-likeness, sharing the gospel, evangelization, spiritual formation, discipleship, ultimately for the purpose of Colossians 1:28, to present everyone complete in Christ. That's our goal.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Chuck, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing these tremendous resources. You also have a new book out that's also related, especially in the category of coaching and teachability, and that
Yes.
is Are You Coachable? I'd like to offer that book to any of our members who are watching this in the future and contact us and say, I want the book by Dr. Chuck Coker called Are You Teachable? Chuck, tell us about that book and how that relates to what we're talking about here.
Well, one of the things that my research has shown is the fact that there are 6 critical elements as to whether a person is going to be teachable and going to learn. The most important thing, as we expressed earlier, was expressed humility. Are they willing to admit that they don't know everything? The second thing internally a person must possess is the motivation to act. So, internally, a person needs to have a level of humility and be willing to express the fact that they don't know everything, and they have to be motivated. Now, interpersonally, an individual has to be willing to seek feedback, knowing that that humility is helping them understand that there are things that I don't know. And one of my favorite expressions when I get a real smart aleck like that is, you know what? You are good, but you ain't God. And most people don't argue with that. And it's one of those things that as we grow and develop, we're going to have feedback. That's why the Lord says, confess our sins one to another. That's why we get married and we form intimate relationships, is because it's not good to be alone. So we seek that feedback. And are we receptive to that feedback? Because you can be humble and you can seek feedback, but if you're not receptive to it, maybe it's the person, you don't like the person, or you don't like the way they look, or the way they dress, or whatever it might be. But interpersonally, you have to seek it and be willing to accept it. Now, there is also an application aspect to being teachable and coachable. And that is, what is my response motive? Is my motive to hear you and apply it? And then, number two, in that application aspect, will I act on the information I got? So what the book does is it walks you through a process of how to use each aspect of your personality to grow and develop. And in each case, I give you case studies that apply to that specific characteristic. And I also give you extra reading material to do it. And then some practices that you can implement in your own life. And here's the cool thing is when you buy the book, you get the $60 test free. So you can go online, take the Coachability Index assessment, know exactly where you are, and then pull the chapters out that are focused on the areas where you might need help. And there is some cool directions about how to build a network, even if you're extremely introverted like many of us.
Well, I got my autographed copy of your book yesterday, and so thank you for that. I'm looking forward to reading
My
it
pleasure.
and sharing it with ECAP members who contact me personally or us through our website or one of the ECAP staff. Just say, I want a copy of Chuck Coker's book. Jeff offered it in this webinar, Meet the Experts with Dr. Chuck Coker. Well, Chuck, tell us one more time about what Life Thrive does, because there's so many more resources. You shared the website lifethrive.com, where there are both free and assessments for cost. So tell us more about what Life Thrive does and how you could help Christian ministries that are watching this.
Well, one of the things that I have focused on after leaving managing a New York Stock Exchange company, and that is bringing high-level quality organizational development principles into faith-based institutions. And one of the challenges is that so many faith-based institutions feel like, I don't have the money to do that kind of stuff. Well, you may not have the money, but you are not going to have the people very long if the organizational development aspects are not adhered to. And one of the things that we try to do is bring those principles to you in a way that will help blend your people together, align them with the focus of the mission, vision, and values, and help you succeed in what God's calling you to do. And that's my commitment to you, is that as we work together and develop these principles, I'll help you make sure that they are right for your culture and for your people.
Well, thank you so much. My guest today on Meet the Experts, Dr. Chuck Coker from Jacksonville Beach. I'm recording this today at Emmanuel Christian Schools in Springfield, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. And this is Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. Meet the Experts. We are a national association of Christian ministries committed to child and youth protection. And this fits right into who we are and what we're championing as we call for spiritual maturity and organizational health in our churches, Christian schools, camps, and other faith-based organizations. So thank you, Chuck, for being with us today. Again, be sure to reach out if you want a copy of that book, and we'll get it to you in the mail, and learn more about lifethrive.com.